He owned half the city, and on the night he turned 40, not one person saved him a seat. Casimir Vale had signed away empires with a single nod, yet the men who feared him forgot the date, and the woman on his arm remembered only what his name could buy her. So he drove until the towers vanished, until the streets turned small and honest, and he walked into a diner that did not know his name. He expected to be ignored there too. Instead, a tired waitress with kind eyes and a sleeping boy in the corner booth pulled out a chair and made room. That one small mercy would burn his old life to the ground. Casimir Vale did not celebrate birthdays. He observed them the way a general observes the anniversary of a battle he barely survived. On the evening he turned 40, the private room above the Cormorant Club had been dressed in black orchids and cold silver because his people knew he despised anything warm or bright. A string quartet played, something restrained in the corner. Waiters in pressed white moved along the walls like careful ghosts, trained never to meet his eyes. The room was full, and every guest in it owed him something, feared him, or wanted a piece of what he controlled. Not one of them was there for him. He stood at the head of the long table, in a charcoal suit cut to hide the weight of the pistol beneath his arm. He held a glass of wine he had not touched. Around him the conversation rose and fell. Deals whispered behind cupped hands, alliances measured in glances. His name moved through the room without stopping, spoken with respect, spoken with hunger, never once spoken with warmth. "You seem far away tonight," said Octavia. She sat to his right in a gown the color of wet slate, her dark hair swept into a flawless arrangement that must have taken hours. She was beautiful, the way a museum is beautiful, something admired from a distance and never touched without permission. Her family controlled the freight yards to the north. Everyone in the room assumed the two of them would formalize an arrangement by winter, and the assumption suited them both. It was clean. It was profitable. It asked nothing of the heart. "I am exactly where I always am," Casimir said. Octavia had already turned back to the man across the table, a shipping magnate whose loyalty she was quietly harvesting on Casimir's behalf. She had forgotten she had spoken to him at all. A hand settled briefly against his shoulder. Corwin, his second, leaned down close to his ear. Corwin was the only man alive who could touch him without invitation and keep the hand. "The Brant people confirmed for Thursday," Corwin murmured. "Aldous wants the meeting on neutral ground. He is nervous about the harbor routes. Let him be nervous. There is something else." Corwin hesitated, a thing he almost never allowed himself. "Nobody arranged anything for tonight. For you, I mean. The orchids, the room, the guest list, all of it was business. I only worked it out an hour ago. Not one person in this building remembered what today actually is." Casimir turned the untouched wine slowly in his fingers. He was not surprised. Surprise required expectation, and he had stopped expecting anything from these people a long time ago. Still, something cold shifted low in his chest, a draft moving through a house he had believed was sealed. Doxpir Zamir let his eyes travel the room one last time. He knew the weight of every person in it. He knew which of them would kneel if he asked and which would bury a knife in his back the moment he stumbled. He knew the exact price of their loyalty, because he had paid it every month in cash and fear and favors. What he did not know, standing there in the middle of his own empire, was the name of a single soul who would have driven through the rain simply because it was his birthday. And they wanted him to feel less alone. There was no such person. There had not been one for many years, and tonight, for reasons he could not name, that arithmetic finally cost him something. He set the glass down. "Have the car brought around?" he said. "You are leaving your own party." "It was never mine, Corwin." He rose without ceremony, and the room noticed at once. Conversations paused, heads turned, and every face arranged itself into some blend of concern and calculation. Somebody lifted a glass and called out a toast to his health and his empire, and the crowd echoed it dutifully, glasses catching the cold silver light. Gadj Casimir walked past all of them without a word, past the black orchids and the careful quartet and the smiles that cost him nothing, because they were worth nothing, down the private stair and out into the night, where the rain had only just begun to fall. The city Casimir Vale ruled ended somewhere past the old rail bridge, and he kept driving until it did. He drove himself, which he almost never did. Corwin and the others he had waved off with a single look that permitted no argument. The car moved through districts that grew steadily smaller and poorer, the glass towers surrendering to shuttered storefronts, coin laundries, and little churches with hand-painted signs. He did not know where he was going. He only knew he could not sit one more minute inside a room full of people who had priced him down to the last decimal and still forgotten he had ever been born. The rain thickened until the wipers could barely keep the glass clear. Somewhere out past the bridge, his headlights caught a smear of warm yellow light on a corner where nothing else was open, a narrow diner wedged between a boarded pharmacy and an empty lot gone to weeds. A hand-lettered sign in the fogged window read, "Marlowe's, open late." Casimir pulled to the curb without quite deciding to. A bell above the door announced him. Inside, the air hung thick with the smell of coffee and frying onions, and something sweeter underneath, cinnamon, warm and clinging. The place held 8 small tables and a long counter lined with cracked vinyl stools. It was nearly empty. An old man in a wet coat nursed a cup near the register. In the far booth, half hidden by the sill, a small boy slept curled beneath a woman's coat, his cheek pressed to a folded paper placement, one worn sneaker dangling off the edge of the seat. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was not what his world called beautiful. She was soft, where Octavia was carved from glass, full-figured and clearly tired, her apron dusted pale with flour, her brown hair slipping loose from its clip in damp curls along her temple. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of double shifts and thin, borrowed sleep. And yet, when she saw him standing in her doorway, soaked and severe in a suit worth more than her building, she did not flinch, and she did not calculate. She simply smiled, the way a person smiles at another person, not the way the world smiled at a price. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," she said. "The kitchen is technically closed, but I have never once turned somebody away in the rain, and I am not about to start on a night this ugly." Casimir did not move. He was not accustomed to being spoken to as though he were an ordinary man. "You are closing," he said. "I am cleaning." "There is a difference." She was already reaching for a clean cup. "The counter has the best seat in the house anyway. Warmest spot we have got. Right up by the pass where the ovens are." She came around the counter with a rag and wiped down a stool that did not need wiping, then pulled it out for him and angled it toward the low pool of heat drifting out of the kitchen. It was a small thing. A stool pulled out, a seat offered, room made for him, without his asking, and without his paying. Dr. Casimir Vale, who an hour ago had walked out of a room of people who wanted him dead, or wanted him useful, felt the plain kindness of it land somewhere he had armored over so long ago he had forgotten the door was bare. He sat. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black." "Of course it is." A flicker of a grin softened her tired mouth. "You have got the look of a black coffee, kind of trouble." Her name was stitched in faded thread across the front of the apron. It read, Coralie. She poured his coffee and then glanced back toward the sleeping boy in the booth, and something in her whole weary face rearranged itself into tenderness. "My sitter fell through tonight," she said, catching where his eyes had gone, a note of apology and quiet defiance mixed together in her voice. "That is Bram. He is a good boy. He sleeps straight through anything. I would never drag him out this late if there were another way. But the lights at home do not keep themselves on." Casimir said nothing. He had stopped listening for a breath because he was watching the window. He had noticed the car when he parked. A gray sedan sat idling across the street, with its headlights off. Wrong for this neighborhood, wrong for this hour, the kind of detail his life had trained him to read, the way other men read the weather. As Coralie talked, The man inside it lowered a phone and looked directly at the diner glass, at her, and then slowly, deliberately, at Casimir himself. The man's face went flat and still in a way Casimir knew intimately, because he had trained men to wear that exact expression in the last quiet moment before they reached for something. Then the sedan eased away from the curb and dissolved into the rain. Coralie had seen none of it. She slid a small plate of warm cinnamon bread across the counter toward him, something he had not ordered and would never have asked for. "On the house," she said simply. "Nobody should be out all alone on a night like this one." She had no idea who he was. She had no idea what had just studied her through her own front window. And Casimir Vale, for the first time in more years than he could stand to count, felt the old instinct stir awake in his chest. Not the instinct to own a thing, but the far older and far more dangerous one, the instinct to protect it. Casimir did not remember the drive home. He remembered the plate of cinnamon bread, which he had eaten, every crumb, standing at the counter like a man who had never been fed in his life. He remembered the way she said honey to a stranger in $1,000 suit, as though the suit were nothing. And he remembered the gray sedan, and the flat still face of the man behind its wheel. By the time the towers rose again around him, the warmth had curdled into something sharper. He pulled out his phone and called Corwin. "I need everything on a diner, past the old rail bridge," Casimir said. "It is called Marlowe's. I need the woman who runs the night shift, first name Coralie, and I need a plate run." Gray sedan, 4-door, was parked across the street, watching the place tonight. Local plates, but they will be false. There was a pause on the line, the sound of Corwin sitting up in the dark. "May I ask why the man who owns half this city is running plates on a roadside diner at 1 in the morning? Because someone was surveilling it, and it was not me." "With respect," Corwin said carefully, "that neighborhood is nothing. No product moves through it, no money worth the name. If somebody is watching a diner out there, it has nothing to do with us. And a man in your position has no business being seen anywhere near it. You walked out of your own party tonight. People noticed. If you start haunting a coffee counter in the dead districts, people will notice that too, and they will wonder what is out there worth your attention. You would be painting a target on whatever it is." Corwin was right, and Casimir knew he was right, and that was precisely the problem. For 20 years, Casimir had survived by treating every act of kindness as a transaction with a hidden invoice. A gift was a hook. A smile was a knife you had not yet felt. When a stranger showed you mercy on the exact night you were at your weakest, the correct response was not gratitude. It was suspicion. Somewhere out there, a rival could have learned it was his birthday, learned he would drive off alone, and placed a soft, warm woman in his path to open him up like a letter. That was how his mind worked. That was how it had kept him breathing. But he had watched Coralie's face when she looked at him, and he had watched it when she looked at her sleeping son, and the two faces were the same face. Nobody was that good an actor. The kindness had been real, which meant the sedan had not come for him at all, which meant it had come for her. "Run the plate anyway," Casimir said. "And Corwin, find out who that diner owes money to." "What makes you think it owes anyone money?" "Because everything in a place like that owes someone money. That is how our world is built. Call me the moment you have a name." He ended the call and sat in the dark of the moving car, and against all his training, Casimir Vale was thinking about someone who was not useful to him, who did not fear him, who did not even know what he was. He should have gone home and slept. He should have let it die. He drove in silence, the wipers beating time. The map of the city he carried in his head had always been mostly empty, wide gray stretches marked with nothing. Neighborhoods too poor to bother naming. He had never once asked what grew in those spaces while he was not looking. A man who never walks his own borders should not be surprised by what he finds there, and he was beginning to suspect he would not like what he found. Instead, the following night, he told his driver to stay home, and he drove himself back across the old rail bridge alone. By the time he crossed it, Corwin had called back twice. The first call confirmed what he already knew in his gut. The woman was exactly what she appeared to be. No connections, no handlers, no rival family behind her. A widow raising one child and working doubles at a failing diner. Clean straight through. It should have been a relief. Somehow it landed like a stone. It was the second call that turned the cold in his chest to something with edges. The plate had come back false, exactly as he had predicted. But the false plate had been issued through a shop that laundered vehicles for exactly one organization in this city, his own. The second night, the diner looked different, because now he was looking properly. Casimir took the same stool at the counter and let the place tell him its story. He had spent his whole life reading rooms for exits and weapons and lies, and it took him only minutes to read this one for its wounds instead. The cracked vinyl on the stools had been patched with tape the exact color of the seats, patched by someone who cared how it looked and could not afford to replace it. The pie case held 4 pies where it was built for a dozen. A water stain bloomed brown across one corner of the ceiling, spreading, unattended, the shape of a debt nobody could pay. Every small thing in the room was being held together by hand, by will, by a woman who refused to let it fall. The old man from the night before sat in the same seat near the register, and tonight Casimir understood he was not a customer, he was Marlowe. His name was the name over the door. His hands shook around the coffee cup, and his eyes had the soft, unfocused warmth of a mind that was beginning, gently, to wander off without him. Coralie refilled his cup without being asked, and touched his shoulder each time she passed, and the old man smiled up at her every single time, as though seeing her arrive was the best thing that had happened to him all day. Perhaps it was. "He raised me," Coralie said, when she caught Casimir watching. She said it plainly. "The way you state a fact you have made peace with, not by blood. My mother waited tables here when I was small, and when she passed, Marlowe just kept me, fed me, taught me the grill. There was no paperwork to it. He just decided I was his, and that was that." She wiped the counter in slow circles. "So now it is my turn to keep him. He does not always know what year it is anymore, but he knows this counter. He knows the bell on the door. As long as Marlowe's is open, he is still himself. The day it closes is the day I lose him for good, so it is not going to close." Casimir looked at the water stain, at the 4 lonely pies, at the tape on the stools. "And who is trying to close it?" he asked. Something guarded moved behind her eyes. Then she smiled it away. "Every small place like this owes somebody," she said lightly. "That is just the arithmetic of it. You learn to make the payments and keep your head down. You would not understand, honey. Your suit costs more than my year." She had no idea. That was the strange, aching thing. She had just described his entire world, back to him, the arithmetic, the payments, the heads kept down, and she had done it while pouring free coffee, and she did not know she was describing the man across her counter, or the machine he sat at the top of. The bell over the door rang. 2 men came in out of the cold, and Casimir felt the whole temperature of the room change. Though Coralie's smile never dropped a millimeter, he knew the type before they had cleared the doormat. Not the flat-faced man from the sedan. Lower than him, muscle sent to lean on the soft. One of them turned the door sign to closed. The other walked to the counter and rested both hands on it, and asked Coralie, in a voice greased with false friendliness, whether she had thought some more about Mr. Rennick's very reasonable offer for the property. "I have your money on Friday like always," Coralie said, steady, quiet, glancing once toward the booth where Bram slept. "Same as every week. There is no need for this." "Friday is not the offer anymore," the man said, and he leaned in across the counter until the friendliness curdled out of his voice entirely. "The offer is, you sell, and this stays civil. Or you keep being stubborn. And Mr. Rennick stops being a patient man. You have seen how it goes for the people who make him wait. Do not become one of them." Casimir set down his coffee. He did not stand. He did not reach for the weapon under his arm. He simply spoke, low, from his stool, without turning around, in the voice he used when he wanted a room to understand exactly where the floor had gone. "Say the name again," Casimir said. "The one whose offer this is. Say it slowly. I want to be certain. I heard it right." The man at the counter turned, annoyed, to see who had spoken. He took in the suit first, the way men like him always did, and it made him careless. He smirked. "Sit down and drink your coffee, Grandad. This is a private conversation." "It is not private," Casimir said, rising from the stool at last unhurried, buttoning his jacket. "It stopped being private the moment you mentioned a name I own." Something in the flat calm of it reached the second man faster than the first. He had been leaning by the door, and now he straightened, and his eyes went to Casimir's face. Really, went to it, the way you finally look at a shape in the dark and understand it was never a coat on a chair. The blood left his cheeks in a slow tide. "Leto," the second man said quietly. "Leto, we need to go." "Shut up. Who is this supposed to be?" "That is, Mr. Vale." The second man's voice had dropped to something close to prayer. "That is Casimir Vale. Look at him. Look at his face." The name landed in the little diner like a stone through ice. The first man, Leto, went the color of the ceiling stain. His hands came off the counter as though it had turned to flame. In his world, the name Vale was not a person, it was weather, it was the thing above everything, and it did not come to diners past the rail bridge, and it did not stand up from a cracked stool 3 feet away, wearing a mild and terrible expression. "Mr. Vale," Leto started. "We did not. We had no idea you had an interest in this place. We were only collecting for Mr. Rennick. This is Rennick's route. We work for Rennick. We would never touch anything of yours." "Rennick's route," Casimir repeated. He said the word route the way another man might say tumor. "You are telling me that a captain of mine has been running paper on the far side of the bridge, squeezing failing shops, threatening children over pie cases, in my city, in my name, and I am hearing about it only now, tonight, in this room, from you." Neither man answered. The answer was written all over them. Casimir had built his life on a single principle, that a kingdom is only as strong as the honesty of its borders, and he had just been shown that his own borders had been rotting for years in the one direction he never bothered to look. Rennick had picked the dead districts precisely because Casimir considered them beneath his notice. He had fed on the people too poor to matter to the man at the top, confident that man would never come down to see. It was, Casimir thought, with a cold and rising fury, a very good plan. It had only one flaw. Tonight the man at the top had gotten lonely and driven across a bridge and been handed a plate of cinnamon bread by one of the victims. "Here is what happens now," Casimir said. "You are going to walk out of this diner. You are not going to hurry, because hurrying frightens the boy, and if you frighten the boy, I will take it personally. You are going to go to Rennick, and you are going to tell him that Marlowe's is closed to him. The debt is closed, the route is closed, Rennick is closed. Tell him Mr. Vale would like a word on Thursday, and tell him I already know the answer to every question I am going to ask, so he should think very hard about his." They went. They did not hurry. The bell rang once, thin and cheerful, and then the two of them were gone into the rain, and the diner was quiet again, except for the hum of the pie case and the old man Marlowe, who had watched all of it with the untroubled eyes of someone for whom the scene had already begun to dissolve. "You young men should not fight in a restaurant," Marlowe said, gently to no one, and went back to his coffee. Casimir turned to Coralie. She had not moved from behind the counter. The rag was still in her hand. But the warmth he had walked in for, the ease, the honey, had drained out of her face, and what was left underneath was something he recognized, because he saw it every morning in his own mirror. It was the face of a person who has been carrying a weight alone for so long that being seen carrying it is almost worse than the weight. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "They will not come back, not them others." "There are always others." Her voice shook. Now the steadiness she had held for the collectors, and the old man and her son finally cracking. You do not understand what you have done. I had an arrangement. I made the payments. I kept my head down, and I kept us safe, and you put your name on us. On Bram. She pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. Whoever you are, you should not have. And then Casimir saw it. As she pressed her wrist to her mouth, he saw how badly her hands were shaking, a fine, relentless tremor she had kept hidden all evening behind the counter, and the busy work and the steady voice she used on frightened old men and frightening young ones alike. And on the shelf beneath the register, its lid nudged open, sat a battered coffee tin, and inside it a small roll of bills, counted and bound and set aside, the week's payment made ready days early so that the moment the men appeared, she would have it in her hand before they had finished crossing the room. She had been living braced for a blow for 2 years. That was what the tin meant. That was what the tremor meant. She had hidden the fear the way people hide the things that have become ordinary. This was not the first visit. It was only the first one with a witness. Something in Casimir's chest that had been frozen for 20 years. Cracked straight down the middle. How long? He said. It was not a question about a single night. It came out of him, low and even and absolutely without mercy. How long have they been coming to make you afraid? It does not matter. It is the only thing that matters. He came to the counter slowly, and he did something he had not done for another human being, in memory. He did not tower. He lowered himself, bracing his forearms on the counter so that his eyes were level with hers, so that for once, the great Casimir Vale was looking up at a tired woman in a flour-dusted apron. I have spent my whole life at the top of a thing that does this to people. I built it. I fed it. And I never once looked down to see who was underneath it because I told myself the people underneath did not concern me. Tonight one of them poured me coffee. She could not spare and called me honey and made room for me when no one else in this city would. So it concerns me now. Do you understand? It concerns me now. From the far booth came a small, sleep-thick voice. Mama? Bram had sat up, blinking his hair, mashed flat on one side, and the instant his eyes found the 2 strange empty spaces where the collectors had stood, his small body went rigid with a fear no child should have learned. He did not cry out. He slid off the seat and moved fast and silent to the gap behind the counter, to a spot he clearly knew by heart, and pressed himself into his mother's legs, and only then, hidden, did he dare to look out. He had been taught to hide. Someone had taught this boy to hide. Casimir looked at the child, folded into the safest corner of a failing diner, and he made a decision that would end one life and begin another. Casimir did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, while the city turned gray outside the tall windows, and Corwin fed him the shape of the thing 1 page at a time, and with every page, the floor of the world tilted a little further beneath him. Rennick has been running the dead districts for 6 years, Corwin said. He had stopped calling him Mr. Rennick sometime around 3 in the morning. Loans, protection, forced sales, small money, spread across hundreds of little places nobody would ever miss. Diners, laundries, corner groceries. He kept every operation under the line where you would notice it, alone. None of it is worth your attention. That was the point. You taught us that the districts past the bridge were beneath the organization. So he built an organization beneath the organization, right there in your blind spot. How much? Casimir said. Corwin told him the number. It was not small money anymore, spread across 6 years and hundreds of desperate people. The small money had become a fortune, a private war chest that had never touched the books Casimir audited. That is not a captain skimming, Casimir said slowly. That is a man funding something. Yes, Corwin laid down the last page, and this was the one that changed everything. It was a map. This is what the forced sales look like when you stop seeing them as separate. When you put them on the same map. Casimir stared at it. The properties Rennick had been squeezing, the ones he had bullied into selling, the ones he was still leaning on. They were not scattered at random across the poor side of the city. They ran in a line. A narrow, deliberate, unbroken line, block by block, from the old rail bridge straight down to the water. They formed a corridor, a private road to the harbor that would belong to whoever held every parcel along it. The harbor routes, Casimir breathed. Brant is not nervous about the harbor routes. Brant is buying one, and Rennick is selling it to him, one poor family at a time. In my territory, with my name for cover. It gets worse. Corwin's voice was very quiet now. The Alliance, Octavia's people, proposed the winter arrangement everyone assumed you would sign. It did not come from Octavia. It was suggested to her family by an intermediary, a friend of the organization, someone trusted. It was Rennick. He has spent a year steering you toward a marriage that would tie up your attention, your name, and your northern flank. All through the season, he needed to finish the corridor. He has been arranging your life like furniture, Casimir. And you let him because you were lonely, and a man who is lonely does not ask too many questions about who is offering him company. Casimir sat with that. It should have enraged him. Instead, strangely, he felt almost calm. The terrible clarity that comes after a long fever breaks. For 20 years he had believed he saw everything. He had not seen the man beside him hollowing out his kingdom, because that man had understood the one thing about Casimir that Casimir refused to understand about himself, that he was starving. That a starving man will follow anyone who sets a plate in front of him and never once check what is in the food. Doc Casimir traced the corridor with one finger from the bridge to the black line of the water, and felt the whole architecture of the last year rearrange itself in his mind into something monstrous and elegant. Every strange decision that had seemed like his own now wore another man's fingerprints, the captains he had been quietly encouraged to promote, the routes he had been advised to ignore as unprofitable. The soft, reasonable voice at his elbow for a year, telling him he worked too hard, that he deserved a match with a northern family, that a man his age should think about the future. He had mistaken a leash for a kindness, because it had been offered gently, and he had been so hungry for anything offered gently that he had never checked the hand holding the other end. Then the last piece landed, and the calm went out of him like a snuffed candle. The corridor, Casimir said. You said. It runs unbroken from the bridge to the water, every parcel sold. Show me the one that is not. Corwin did not need to look at the map. There is a single holdout, one property, dead in the middle of the line, that Rennick has been unable to move for 2 years, no matter how hard he pushed. Without it, the corridor is worthless. Brant will not pay for a road with a hole in the center of it. Everything Rennick has built for 6 years depends on breaking this one last owner. He met Casimir's eyes. It is a diner past the bridge. It is called Marlowe's. The room went very still. Coralie had no handlers, no family behind her, no idea what she was sitting on. She had refused to sell for 2 years for the simplest reason in the world, because selling meant closing, and closing meant losing the old man who had kept her when no one else would. She thought she was being stubborn about a coffee counter. She had no notion that her small, exhausted, unglamorous refusal to abandon Marlowe was the single thing standing between Aldous Brant and the harbor, the single crack Rennick's whole betrayal had run aground on. A plus-size single mom, too poor to matter, had been holding the line against a war she did not know was being fought, armed with nothing but the fact that she loved an old man too much to sell his memory out from under him. He thought of the water stain on her ceiling, spreading, because there was never money to stop it. He thought of the 4 pies in a case built for 12. He thought of a boy taught to fold himself into a gap behind a counter and go silent. And he understood now that the fear that had trained that child was not random misfortune. It had a name, and the name was on Casimir's own payroll, and it had been eating this family alive for 2 years to complete a road Casimir would drive over one day without ever knowing whose lives were paved beneath it. She is not collateral, Casimir said. She is the whole battle. And the moment Rennick understands I have taken an interest in that diner, he will understand exactly why I have. He will know I have found the corridor. He will not wait for Thursday. Corwin had gone pale. You sent him a message. Last night. You told 2 of his men that you wanted a word. I did. Then he already knows. Corwin was already standing, already reaching for his phone. Casimir, if breaking that holdout is the only thing keeping his entire plan alive, and he knows you are about to close on him, then he is not going to try to buy the diner anymore. He is going to remove the reason it will not sell. He is going to remove her. Casimir was on his feet before Corwin finished the sentence. Get the cars, he said. All of them. We are going back across the bridge and we are going now. He made it across the bridge in half the time the law allowed, 3 cars behind him, and when he saw the warm yellow light of Marlowe's still burning on its corner, he felt something unlock in his chest that he had no name for, because he had never before in his life been afraid of arriving too late to save someone who could do nothing for him. The bell rang. Coralie looked up from the counter, and her face moved through 3 things in a single second: gladness, then wariness, then something close to alarm, because a man does not come back to a roadside diner a 3rd time in as many days, in the gray hour before the city was properly awake, with that particular set to his jaw, unless the world has tilted. You need to close up, Casimir said. Tonight, right now, you need to wake Bram and wake Marlowe, and come with me, and I will explain everything on the way. But we do not have the time for me to explain it first. I am not going anywhere with you. She said it kindly, but it was iron underneath. I do not know your name. You throw men out of my diner, and then you tell me to leave with you in the dark. I have a child. Whatever this is, whatever you are, the answer is no. My name is Casimir Vale. He watched the name fail to mean anything to her, and he understood he was going to have to do the hardest thing, which was to tell the truth plainly to a person who had shown him kindness before she knew what he was. In this city, there is a machine, he said. It lends money to people who have run out of it, and then it owns them. It takes protection from people who have nothing to protect themselves with. It runs the docks and the freight, and half of what moves through this place, and it has for 20 years, and it does all of that because one man sits at the top of it and lets it. That man is me. The debt on this diner, the men who have made you afraid, the offer for your property, the reason your sitter is always the last thing you can afford, all of it runs uphill, and every road it runs on ends at my door. I am the reason your life is the shape it is. I did not know your name 3 days ago. I know it now, and I know that I built the thing that has been crushing you, and I am telling you this before I ask you to trust me, because you fed me when you thought I was nobody, and you are owed the truth, even if it makes you spit in my face. The diner was silent. Marlowe hummed something tuneless in his corner. Bram slept on. Coralie set down the rag. Her hands were shaking. When she spoke, her voice was very low, so it would not carry to the booth. I gave you free bread, she said. Yes, I called you honey. I made you a seat by the ovens because you looked like the loneliest man I had ever seen. And the whole time you were the... She could not finish it. Her eyes were bright and furious and wet. Get out of my diner. I will. But not without the 3 of you. Because a man named Rennick, who works for me, built his entire fortune squeezing this street, and your refusal to sell this diner is the one thing standing between him and the harbor, and as of last night, he knows I have found him. Which means the reasonable business problem you have managed for 2 years just became the reason he needs you gone before Thursday. He is not coming to make an offer anymore, Coralie. I have 3 cars outside and a doctor on call and a house behind walls, and I am the last person on earth you want to trust. And I am also, tonight, the only person alive who can make certain these men never set foot near that boy again. Hate me in the car, please. Just do it in the car. Something in the word, please, the same word she had probably said to 100 collectors and landlords and creditors and been ignored, something in hearing it come from a man who had clearly never said it to anyone, reached her where the argument could not. She looked at Bram, she looked at Marlowe, gently unspooling in his seat, the old man who did not know what year it was, but knew the bell on the door. She looked at the water stain, at the taped stools, at everything she had bled to hold together, and Casimir watched her do the arithmetic. He knew too well, the arithmetic of a person deciding what she could bear to lose. If anything happens to my son, she said, there is no wall high enough in this city to keep me from you. Do you understand that? I do not care what you are. I would think less of you if there were, Casimir said. He took out his phone then in front of her and made one call, because he wanted her to see it, because some part of him had already understood that this woman would never again be able to trust a word he said, only a thing he did. The line connected. A cool, elegant voice answered the voice of the northern family, of the winter arrangement, of the life that had been built around him, like a cage with the bars disguised as furniture. It is Vale, he said. The arrangement is finished. There will be no winter and no alliance. And you should know it was never Ottavia's idea or mine. We were both being moved by the same hand, and I have only just seen it. Tell your father the northern flank is his own again. With my respect and my apology, do not look for another meeting. He paused. And if you hear in the coming days that I have gone to war over a diner, do not trouble yourself trying to understand it. You never would. He ended the call and put the phone away. In 1 minute he had cut loose the single largest strategic alliance available to a man in his position, the profitable, sensible, bloodless future everyone had assumed he would take, and he had done it for a woman who had just told him to get out of her diner, and meant it. Who was that? Coralie asked, despite herself. The rest of my old life, Casimir said. Get the boy, we are leaving. Waking Marlowe was its own small heartbreak. The old man did not understand why the diner was closing in the middle of the night, and he kept reaching for his apron and asking whether the breakfast dough had been set. And Coralie answered every question, as though it were the first time he had asked it, gently, without a flicker of impatience, buttoning his coat and finding his hat, and promising him that yes, they would open again in the morning, that the counter would still be there, that he was not losing anything. Dad Casimir stood in the doorway and watched her do it, and thought that he had broken hard men with less resolve than it took this woman to lie kindly to the person she loved most. Bram woke without fuss and without questions, which was worse than crying would have been, because it meant a boy his age had learned that when the grown-ups moved fast and quiet in the dark, you moved with them and you did not ask why. He looked up at the enormous stranger in the doorway, with the wary, measuring eyes of someone twice his age. Are you the police? Bram asked. No, Casimir said. Are you a bad man? Coralie went still. Casimir crouched, slowly, until he was down at the boy's level on the sticky diner floor, and he considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because he had never in his life been asked it by anyone who would believe the answer either way. I have been, he said. I am trying to be a different thing tonight. You can decide for yourself whether I manage it. That seems fair. Bram studied him for a long moment, then reached up and took his mother's hand and allowed himself to be led toward the door and the waiting cars and the rain, past the 4 pies and the tape stools and the bell that Marlowe loved, out of the only warm room any of them had, and into the keeping of the most dangerous man in the city. To Casimir's house had been designed to impress and to intimidate, and it did both, and it had never once been warm. Coralie stood in the cavernous marble foyer with her sleeping son heavy on her shoulder and her flour-dusted apron still tied at her waist, and she looked at the sweeping stair and the cold art and the ceilings built for a man with no one to fill them, and Casimir saw the house the way she saw it, plainly, and was ashamed of it. You live here, she said. It was not a compliment. I sleep here. I am not certain anyone lives here. A woman named Perrin, the physician who answered only to Casimir, met them in the East Hall and took in the exhaustion in Corley's face and the tremor still running through her hands, and the old man swaying on his feet, and asked no questions because she had learned long ago that Casimir's midnight arrivals were not to be interrogated. She settled Marlowe into a warm room and checked Bram without waking him, and pressed a warm cup of something into Corley's hands, and told her gently to sit before she fell, and moved through the house doing quiet, competent kindness, and it was the first thing in the building that did not feel like a threat. They put Bram to bed in a room bigger than Corley's whole apartment. She would not leave him, so Casimir had a chair brought, and she sat by the bed in the low light, and for a while neither of them spoke. "He asked if you were a bad man," Corley said at last, not looking at him, "and you told him the truth. Most men would have lied to a child to make themselves feel better. You did not." She turned the warm cup slowly in her hands. "I have not decided anything about you. I want that understood. You brought us somewhere safe, and I am grateful. My son is behind a wall tonight. That is the whole of what I feel. Do not build anything on it." "I would not know how," Casimir said. "I have never had anything built on gratitude, only fear. I would not recognize the material." She almost smiled. She caught it and did not let it finish. "Why us?" she said after a while, so quietly he almost missed it. "You could have handled this, Rennick, with a phone call and never come near us again. You have the whole world to run. Why sit in a diner 3 nights running? Why any of this?" Casimir was quiet for a long time. He was not a man who explained himself, because no one had ever had standing to ask. "On the night we met," he said finally, "I had walked out of a room of 200 people who would die for my favor, and not one of them who would sit with me, because they wanted to. I have more of everything than any man could spend, and I could not have bought what you handed me for free, without a second thought, a seat by the warm part of the kitchen. My coffee the way I take it. Somebody calling me a soft name and meaning nothing by it, except that it was cold outside and I looked like I needed it." He looked at the sleeping boy, not at her. "You made room for me when the whole city had decided there was none. I have spent 3 days learning that the reason there was no room in your life for anything else is that my own people had been taking it from you, a piece at a time. I am not doing this to be good, Corley. I passed good a long way back. I am doing it because for the first time in 20 years, I want to deserve a chair somebody pulled out for me, and there is only one way left to do that." Down the hall, Casimir found Corwin in the study with 3 phones and a face like a closing door. "How bad?" Casimir said. "Bad. Rennick has gone quiet, which is worse than loud. His known crews have pulled off their usual corners in the last 4 hours. He is consolidating. He knows you are moving on him, and he is not going to sit still for a meeting on Thursday where you dismantle him in front of the other captains." Corwin hesitated. "And Casimir, there is something you are not going to want to hear. The plate on that first sedan cleared through our own laundry shop, yes. But someone authorized that. Someone inside this organization has been signing Rennick's paper for years. Quietly, from close to the top. Rennick did not build a machine in your blind spot alone. He had help from a man you trust. I do not yet know which one, which means I cannot yet tell you which faces in this house tonight are yours and which are his." The words settled over the warm rooms like frost. Somewhere above them, Coralie sat guarding her son in a house that Casimir could no longer promise was safe, because the rot he had discovered in the dead districts ran, it seemed, all the way up his own stair. "Trust the men who came with us across the bridge tonight, and no others," Casimir said. "Double the watch. Nobody enters or leaves without your eyes on them." It was then that Perrin appeared in the study doorway, and the look on her face turned the frost to ice. "The old man," she said. "Marlowe. He is agitated. He keeps trying to leave. He does not understand where he is. He says he has to open up, that the breakfast crowd will be waiting, that he cannot leave the counter untended. I have kept him calm for now, but, Casimir, a mind like his fixes on one thing when it is frightened, And the one thing his mind knows how to find is that diner. If he slips a door in the night, he will not wander in circles. He will walk straight back to the only place he still believes in. He will walk straight back to Marlowe's. Casimir stood very still. The diner, the one property Rennick needed, emptied. The corridor's single broken link. The place that, tonight, Rennick's consolidating crews would be drawn to like water finding the low ground, because breaking that holdout was the whole point, and an empty diner in the dark was an invitation. And into that, if they were not careful, a confused old man might walk at first light, looking for a breakfast crowd that would never come, straight into the middle of the one place in the city most likely to catch fire before morning. Post a man on his door, Casimir said. Post two. He does not leave this house. He turned to Corwin. And get eyes on the diner now. If Rennick is moving tonight, that corner is where he moves, and I want to know the moment anything touches it. Corwin was already dialing. He got as far as lifting the phone to his ear before it rang in his hand. On its own, the screen lighting the dark study, and the name on it belonged to the man Corwin had sent to watch the bridge. Corwin answered, listened for 3 seconds, and looked up. Headlights, he said, a lot of them. Crossing the bridge toward the diner, Rennick is not waiting for the old man to wander to him. He lowered the phone. He is going to burn the holdout to the ground tonight and let the debt take the ashes. Doc Smears stood over the map in the study while Corwin counted the headlights coming across the bridge, and the cold competence that had built an empire settled back over him, like a coat he had taken off for 3 days and now put on for the last time. He is not just burning a building, Casimir said. Think. Rennick knows I found the corridor. He knows I care about that corner, because I sent 2 of his men running from it with a message. If he only wanted the holdout gone, he would have done it quietly. An electrical fault, a grease fire, something the insurance and the debt could swallow by morning. Instead, he is crossing the bridge with his lights on. He wants me to see it. He wants me to come. Corwin lowered the phone. It is bait. It is bait. He cannot beat me in a room full of captains on Thursday, so he is going to end it tonight, on ground he has chosen, before I can gather anyone. He burns the diner. I come running, because he has correctly understood that I will, and somewhere on that dark corner, he has men waiting for the one thing that would solve every problem he has at once. Me in the open, with only the few I trust, walking toward a fire. Casimir almost admired it. And he has a man inside my house to make certain I am blind coming in. That is the shape of it. Then we do not go, Corwin said. You have said it yourself. It is a trap built to burn you. We let the diner burn. It is a building, Casimir. We take Rennick apart legally, patiently, from a position of strength. On Thursday, the way you have taken apart every enemy you have ever had. You do not walk into a fire, a man built specifically to burn you. It was the correct advice. It was the advice Casimir would have given himself a week ago. And it would have been right, because a week ago there had been nothing on that corner worth his life. He opened his mouth to answer, and that was the moment the guard from the east wing came through the study door at a run, white to the lips. The old man is gone. The room went silent. He was asking for his apron, the guard said, the words tumbling. We told him to rest. We were watching the front of his room, both of us, like you said. There is a service door at the back of the linen closet. We did not. Nobody uses it, and he must have. He is old, but he is not stupid about that place. He found it, and the side gate on the east lawn was standing open when I checked. And Casimir, it should not have been open. Someone opened it. The mole, not a coincidence. Someone in the house had unlatched a door for a confused old man and pointed him at the night, because a frightened mind fixed on one idea would do the rest, and a beloved old man wandering helplessly toward the diner was the surest bait of all, better than any fire, the one lure Casimir could not possibly refuse. Coralie was in the doorway. Nobody had heard her come. She had one hand pressed flat over her mouth, and her eyes had gone huge and black, And Casimir watched 2 years of holding herself together come apart in a single second. "He is walking to the diner," she whispered. "In the dark, in the cold. He thinks he has to open up." Her voice climbed. "He does not know what year it is. He does not know the men. He will walk right up to them and start apologizing for being late. And they are going to." She could not say it. "I have to go. Right now. I have to go get him." "You are not going anywhere near that corner," Casimir said. "That is my father." It came out of her raw. The word she had never used for Marlowe, in all the careful ways she had described him, not by blood, kept me, and decided I was his. Now, with him walking toward a fire, the truth of it burned all the qualifiers away. He is the only father I have ever had, and he raised me out of nothing, and he is going to die alone and confused on a wet street because he loved a diner too much to let it go. The exact same diner I would not sell, which means this is my fault, all of it, and I will not sit behind your wall while it happens. You will have to chain me to this house, Casimir, and even then I will chew through it." Gajimir looked at her, and he understood that there was no version of the next hour in which this woman stayed behind, and that a person who would chew through a wall for someone she loved was the single most dangerous and most trustworthy thing he had ever encountered. And that he had spent his whole life surrounded by men who would not cross a room for him, and had somehow at 40 in a diner met the opposite. "You will ride with Corwin, 3 streets back," he said. "You will not set foot on that corner until I send word it is clear. If you break that, you make Bram an orphan for nothing. And I did not tear my whole life down this week to let you do that. Those are the terms. Take them or I leave you locked in this room, and I am not gentle about it." "Take them," Corley said instantly. Casimir turned to the guard. "Wake the men who rode over with us. Only them. Corwin, you have the boy move to the safe room with Perrin and 2 men on the door, and then you drive her yourself, and you do not let her out of that car." He was already checking the weapon under his arm, already moving. "Rennick built a fire to draw me out. Fine. I am drawn, but he made one mistake in the arithmetic, the same mistake I made for 20 years. He thinks the diner is worthless, a pawn, a thing you burn to win the real game." He pulled the study door open on the cold hallway and the waiting dark. "He does not understand that, as of 3 nights ago, that corner is the only thing in this city I would die on. And a man who does not know what you truly value can never ever predict what you will do to keep it." Before they left, Corley went to the safe room, where Perrin was settling Bram. The boy was awake again, sensing the change in the air the way he always did, and he gripped his mother's sleeve and asked where she was going, and Corley knelt and told him she was going to fetch Marlowe and bring him home, and that she would be back before he woke, and that he was to mind Perrin and be brave. Bram looked past her to Casimir, standing in the doorway. "You bring my mom back," the boy said. It was not a request. A child who had been taught to hide had also, somewhere, been taught to bargain with the dangerous, and he was doing it now, small and fierce. "I will bring them both back," Casimir said. "You have my word, and I have never once broken it, not even for the people I should have." They went out into the rain, and across the bridge, the sky had already begun to glow the wrong color. Casimir rode in the lead car with 2 of the bridge men, and he watched the glow on the horizon resolve as they crossed the water, from a smear to a flicker to the unmistakable pulse of a fire finding its feet. Rennick had not burned the diner yet. He was burning something near it, the boarded pharmacy, perhaps, a signal fire, a lure, close enough to draw a crowd of emergency lights and confusion, far enough that the diner itself still stood, dark and waiting, the trap laid around a building Rennick assumed no one sane would die for. Casimir counted the shapes of parked vehicles as they came off the bridge, read the angles, found the men Rennick had tucked into the shadows of the shipping lot across the street, and felt the old cold logic of violence lay itself out before him, clean and total. Somewhere in that dark, walking toward the fire in a buttoned coat and a hat, apologizing to no one for being late, was an old man who had once decided a hungry child was his and never asked for anything in return. Dokanjimir intended to reach him first. Everything else that happened tonight would arrange itself around that single fact. The signal fire lit the whole corner in shuddering orange. The boarded pharmacy beside the diner had been soaked and set, and it burned high and theatrical, throwing enough light and smoke to pull every eye on the street toward it, and enough shadow behind it to hide a dozen men. Across the road, in the black mouth of the old shipping lot, Rennick had placed his ambush exactly where Casimir had known he would, angled to catch a man rushing in the obvious way, from the front, toward the fire. Doc Samir did not come from the front. He had spent 20 years learning that the mind of an enemy is a map you can walk, and he had walked Rennick's an hour ago, in his study. A man clever enough to build a hidden empire would also be arrogant enough to assume his prey would arrive predictably. So Casimir had sent 2 cars loud and slow toward the fire, from the bridge road, headlights blazing, to hold Rennick's attention, and he had brought the men he trusted around on foot through the empty lot behind the diner, through the weeds and the dark. The one approach a burning pharmacy had conveniently ruined everyone's night vision against. And there was the other thing. Before they left the house, Casimir had told the assembled men that they would strike the diner corner, from the west, along the water. He had said it clearly in a room he could not promise was clean, precisely because he could not promise it was clean. Then in the cars, he had changed it. If there was a mole, the mole had carried west to Rennick, and Rennick had waited his west side, and every gun now sat pointing at an approach Casimir was not using. A lie told to a traitor is worth more than 100 honest men. They took the shipping lot quietly. Casimir's people came out of the dark behind Rennick's, and it was over faster than the fire beside it. Not a battle so much as a correction, a room set right. There was a short, ugly scuffle. Boots and grunts and the clatter of dropped weapons swallowed by the roar of the flames, and then the ambush that had been laid for Casimir simply ceased to exist. And the men who had been sent to end him were face down on the wet ground of the lot, disarmed and pinned beneath Casimir's people. And the only one still on his feet, turning, understanding far too late that the map he had been walked back at him, was Rennick. He was younger than his crimes, sharp-faced and well-dressed, a man who had learned Casimir's manners without any of the things underneath them. He had a pistol in his hand, and no one left to use it on. He looked at Casimir across the burning light, and to his credit, he did not beg. He recalculated, the way his kind always did, hunting for the angle. "You came from the water," Rennick said. "You were told what I wanted you to be told." Casimir walked toward him unhurried, and his men held their positions because they knew this part was his. 6 years, Rennick, in my blind spot. Off the backs of people so poor, I had trained myself not to see them. I will give you this, it was well built. You understood me better than my friends do. You knew I was too proud to look down. You knew I was lonely enough to be steered. You built your whole life on the 2 truest things about me. And you were right about both. He stopped a few paces away. You made only one error. And it is going to cost you everything, because it already has. Enlighten me, Rennick said, though his eyes had begun to move. To the lot, to the count of his men going down around him, to the sum going wrong. You chose the diner as your pawn, Casimir said, the worthless holdout. The thing you sacrificed to reach the real prize. You could not conceive that the corner might be worth more to me than the harbor, because to you it is nothing, a coffee counter run by a fat, tired widow who would not take a hint. You never once imagined that the thing you treated as garbage was the one thing I would come through your fire to protect. You did not lose tonight because I outgunned you, Rennick. You lost because you do not know what a thing is worth unless someone tells you its price. And nobody ever put a price on kindness, so you could not see it sitting right in the middle of your map. There was a sound then, from the direction of the diner, that turned Casimir's blood to water. An old man's voice, querulous and cheerful, calling out across the burning street. You will have to wait for the counter. Friends, I am running behind this morning. The dough is not even proofed. Marlowe had arrived. He stood in the diner's doorway, in his coat and his hat, framed against the dark glass, blinking at the fire next door with mild confusion, entirely unaware that the wet shapes in the lot were men, that the orange light was a weapon, that anything at all was wrong. He had walked the whole way through the cold night to open up, and he had found the world on fire, and he had decided it was simply a very busy morning. Rennick's gun came up, not toward Casimir, toward the old man in the doorway. The holdout, the last broken link in his corridor, the entire reason for the night, standing helpless and lit and utterly without understanding in the frame of his own front door. Casimir did not think. A lifetime of training made the choice before the thought arrived. He crossed the space between himself and Rennick in the half-second it took the barrel to rise, closed one hand over the weapon before it could level, and wrenched it up and away, and put the younger man down hard against the wet concrete, with an arm bent behind his back. All of it done decisively, without heat and without hesitation. The way you close a door against the cold. The gun never fired. It skidded away across the wet concrete and into the dark, and Rennick lay pinned and breathing in ragged gulps, and the light went out of the corridor scheme, and the 6 years and the harbor and all of it at once, quietly, the way a lie ends when the last person, believing it stops. The signal fire crackled. The old man in the doorway had already lost interest in it, and was patting his coat pockets for keys he did not have, humming. Mom! Casimir said, and made his voice gentle. The voice he had heard Coralie use, a voice he had not known he possessed. He left Rennick pinned and finished on the wet concrete, his men closing in around him, and did not look back. Marlowe, the breakfast crowd, went home. It is too early even for you. Let me walk you to your girl. She has been looking everywhere for you. Marlowe peered at him, and something in the old, ruined mind found the shape of trust. You know my Coralie? He asked. I do, Casimir said, and took the old man's arm and turned him away from the fire and the lot and the men on the ground, gently, so that Marlowe saw none of it, so that in the morning he would remember none of it, so that whatever few good years the old man had left would not carry this one. She is just up the road. Come, mind the puddle. There you are. Casimir walked the old man up the road, away from the smoke, and lifted his phone with his free hand and said 2 words to Corwin. It is clear. And before he had finished the second word he heard a car door somewhere behind him fly open against every instruction he had given, and running footsteps slap the wet pavement. Out of the dark, having broken her promise the instant she was allowed to, and she did not run to Casimir, she ran to Marlowe. She caught the old man against her and held him the way you hold something you had already begun, in the worst part of your heart, to grieve. Marlowe patted her back, puzzled and pleased, and told her she was being very silly, that he had only stepped out to open up, that there was no call for tears before breakfast. Over his shoulder Coralie looked at Casimir, and her face was wet and wild and shattered open, and she did not say thank you, because thank you was far too small a word, and they both knew it. She just looked at him across the burning street, across everything he was and everything he had just done in the dark for a man who would not even remember it, and something passed between them that had no name in the language Casimir had been raised to speak. Behind them, the fire crews arrived at last, and turned their hoses on the pharmacy, and the diner, the stubborn, worthless diner that had held the line against an empire, stood untouched on its corner, dark and whole, waiting for morning. Aldous Brant called 4 days later, and Casimir let it ring twice before he answered, standing at the tall window of a study that felt, for reasons he was still learning, less like a mausoleum than it used to. You are a difficult man to reach lately, Brant said. The voice was smooth, but there was a hairline crack running through it, the sound of a man who had wired an enormous sum toward a road that no longer existed. I have been busy in the parts of my city I used to neglect, Casimir said. You would not believe what grows out there when a man stops paying attention. I have been doing a great deal of weeding. A silence. Brant understood waiting. Rennick was ambitious, Brant said carefully. Whatever arrangement he may have implied he had authority to make, I assure you, my interest was purely in legitimate freight. Your interest was in a corridor to my harbor, assembled for you one broken family at a time, by a trader on my payroll, and you knew every stone of it. Casimir's voice did not rise. It never needed to. The corridor is finished, Aldous. Every parcel Rennick forced has been returned to the families he stole it from, and every debt he manufactured has been burned. There is no road for you to buy. There never will be. And I want you to hear the next part very clearly, because I am only going to say it once, and then we are never going to speak again. I spent 20 years not looking at the people, at the bottom of my world. I am looking now. If you or yours ever again lay so much as a finger on the small and the poor of this city to get at me, I will not answer it with business. I will answer it as a man who has finally remembered he has something worth defending, and you do not want to learn what that man is willing to do. Stay north of the bridge. Enjoy your freight. Do not call me again. He hung up before Brant could find a reply, and he found that he felt nothing about it at all. No triumph, no anger, just the quiet of a debt paid. The rebuilding of the dead districts took longer than the tearing down had. Dak Azamir did it himself. In the daylight, which scandalized his organization more than any of the violence ever had. He walked the corridor block by block, the corridor that was no longer a corridor, and he sat in the laundries, and the corner groceries and the little failing shops that Rennick had bled, and he tore up paper in front of the people who owed it, and he asked them, one by one, what they needed to stand on their own feet. Which was a question no one at the top of his world had ever thought to ask the bottom of it. Corwin thought he had lost his mind. Corwin was not entirely certain he was wrong. But the men who had come across the bridge that night began to look at Casimir differently, and so, slowly, did Casimir. Marlowe remembered none of the fire. That mercy held. In his good hours, he stood at his counter and set his dough and greeted the bell on the door, and in his fading ones, Coralie was always there to fill the gaps. And the diner, which now owed no one anything, stayed open, which meant that Marlowe, in the only way that mattered, stayed himself. Doc Casimir came on Thursdays. It became a thing without either of them deciding it the way the important things do. He would drive himself across the bridge in the evening, alone, no cars behind him, and he would take the stool at the end of the counter, the warm one by the pass, the one Coralie had pulled out for him on the worst and best night of his life. Bram had stopped watching him with the measuring eyes. The boy had graduated, over the weeks, to sitting on the neighboring stool and interrogating Casimir about everything a 7-year-old finds urgent, and Casimir, who had negotiated with killers, found that he took these interrogations more seriously than any deal he had ever closed, because Bram had not yet learned to hide from him. And Casimir intended to make certain the boy never had to again. "You look less like trouble than you used to," Coralie told him one night, sliding a plate across the counter. Warm cinnamon bread he had never once ordered and always received. Little bit, around the edges. "You are a bad influence," Casimir said. "I am the best influence you have ever had, and you know it, and it terrifies you." She said it lightly, wiping the counter in the old, slow circles, but she held his eyes a beat longer than the joke required, and neither of them looked away, and the thing between them that had no name in his old language was slowly finding words in a new one. He did not offer to buy the diner. That was the whole point, and he understood it now. The difference between the man he had been and the man a tired woman in a flour-dusted apron had accidentally called into being. The old Casimir would have solved Coralie with money, would have paid off her life, and installed her behind a wall and called it love, because owning was the only verb he knew. He did not want to own her. He wanted to be let in. He wanted the stool to be his, because she kept it for him, not because he held the deed to the building it sat in. He had spent 40 years accumulating everything a man could hold and had arrived at last at the one thing that could not be taken, only given. A place at a small counter, room made, on purpose, by someone who wanted him there. On the night he turned 40, no one in a city he owned had saved him a seat. He had eaten a plate of free bread at a dying diner an hour later. Served by a woman the world had decided did not count, and it had turned out that she was the only person in the whole of that city who counted at all. She had made room for a stranger in the rain because that was simply who she was, and in doing it she had reached past a lifetime of armor and fear and cold counting and found the starving man underneath. And she had fed him and she had changed everything he was. There was one evening Casimir would keep for the rest of his life, folded away where he kept nothing else, because he owned almost nothing that could not be bought, and this could not be bought. It was late, and the diner was empty, and Marlowe was having one of his good hours, the clear ones that came less often now. The old man had been watching Casimir refill the sugar jars, a task Casimir had somehow been assigned and now performed every Thursday with the same grave care he had once given to the movement of money and men. Marlowe regarded him for a long while with eyes that were for that hour entirely present. "You are the one who comes on Thursdays," Marlowe said. "I am for her." He said it as a certainty, not a question. The old man's gaze went to Coralie, laughing at something Bram had said across the room, and softened. "I kept her when she was small because nobody else would, and everybody told me I was a fool. One more mouth I could not feed. Best foolish thing I ever did." He turned back to Casimir, and there was something shrewd and unguarded in it, the whole of a long life looking out through a failing mind for one clear moment. "The world never made much room for my girl. Too poor, too soft, too easy to look past. I always worried who would see her, after me." He nodded slowly, as though confirming a thing he had decided. "You see her?" "I do," Casimir said. His voice was not entirely steady, which had not happened to him since he was a much younger and harder man. "Good," said Marlowe, and patted his hand once, and went back to watching the room, and by morning he would not remember saying any of it, but Casimir would. Casimir, who forgot nothing, and who had just been given, by a man who forgot almost everything, the only blessing he had ever wanted. "Same time next week?" Coralie asked, as she always did now, at the end of the night when the chairs were up, and Marlowe was dozing, and Bram had finally surrendered to sleep in the booth, beneath his mother's coat. Daxmere looked at the warm little room that had cost him his whole old life, and given him a new one, and at the boy in the booth, and the old man at peace, and the woman who had made room for him when no one else on earth would. "Same time next week," he said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Casimir Vale was somewhere he actually wanted to be. Casimir Vale did not fall for a woman because she was beautiful or useful or afraid of him, the way his whole world had trained him to expect. He was undone by something far rarer. On the one night he had never felt smaller. A woman the world had written off pulled out a chair and made room for him, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply because no one should be alone in the rain. And that single ordinary kindness taught the most powerful man in the city, the one thing his empire never could, that the people we overlook are so often the only ones who truly see us. If this story reached you tonight, do something kind for someone the world forgets, and make a little room. Smash that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me in the comments the moment that stayed with you. I will see you in the next one.